All right, here we're going to go over how to we're going to wrap a double foot guide. All we're going to do is put the guide on the blank and mark with a China marker the ends of our guide feet. Right where the guide feet stop. What that's going to do is tell us where to start and stop our underwrap. Now on a double foot guide, especially on a heavier rod, you're going to want to underwrap. What an underwrap is a layer of thread. We're going to wrap from here to here. And that's going to provide a little bit of a cushion between the guide foot and the blank. When a rod is flexed and under pressure, over time, without an underwrap, the guide feet might start to wear on the blank and create weak spots. We want to avoid that. Plus, the underwrap just looks better. So again, I'm going to take my thread towards the tip, because I'm going to wrap from the butt towards the tip. Just tape it to the blank. You can do this by hand by putting the thread under itself. Easiest way to explain and show it is just use a piece of tape. There's no headache. Go ahead and bring the thread down where we're going to wrap. And actually, because we're going to use this thread also as a trim band, which you'll understand in a second, I'm going to bring the thread past our guide feet. So about 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch past where our marks are. We're going to cover those marks. And just like before, I'm going to bring the rod around and cross the thread over itself. And again, here I'm using the foot pedal. We can do this by hand also. Just cross the thread over itself. Again, those gaps we'll push together in a second. I want to get 5, 6, 7 wraps on there. Take our razor blade. Cut this tag off. Take that thread out of the way. Tape out of the way. Now I'm just going to wrap the thread all the way up. Just like that. We made a little mistake, put too much back pressure. Not a problem. Unwind the thread a little bit and continue our wrap. And again, any little gaps along the way, not a problem. We'll burnish those out. But big gaps in a wrap like this can kind of be a headache. So you want to kind of fill those in along the way, but small ones doesn't matter. As you can see right here, I'm just going over where my mark is, so I know here shortly I've got about 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch left to go. So put a few wraps on there. I know I've got about 6, 7 wraps before I want to end my wrap. So I'm going to go ahead and take my quick pull, put it under the thread. Again, the loop is facing towards the direction we're wrapping. 5 or 6 wraps on there, 7 if you want, it won't hurt. Put our thread through the loop, just like that. Keeping tension on our thread, just like that. Pull the loop through. Now we've tied off our wrap. Now what I'm going to do is take my burnishing tool. All I'm doing here is turning the rheostat up a little bit, make the rod wrap a little quicker. Push our thread together, fill in those gaps. There we have a nice pretty wrap. Now before I wrap my guide feet, actually what I'd like to do a good bit ahead of time is I'll take my guides with a file Personally, I use a bench grinder or a Dremel, and I'll file the guide feet nice and smooth. So we get a nice transition from the blank up onto the guide feet. Now these guides are already pre-ground. They've got a nice taper on them, so the guide or the thread will smoothly transition up onto the guide. I'll just finish it off a little bit. You can see it's taking off the finish, the paint of the guide. You want to make sure you don't use a file that's too aggressive, that makes grooves in your guide foot. That'll cause problems with your thread, or you'll want to cut your thread as you're wrapping. Again, I personally use a bench grinder or a Dremel, but for the audio reasons and just to show you how basic you can be, just use a regular file. File both sides of the guide feet. So we get a nice smooth ramp up onto our guide. All right, now we're ready to wrap our guide on. Again, lined up with our reel seat, just roughly. Split our underwrap. Tape it down. We've got our thread taped in the direction that we're going to wrap. We're going to wrap our thread down and around, come over the guide foot that we're going to wrap to add some extra tension to it. Bring it around. I want my trim band for my underwrap to show through about a quarter of it, or not, rather an eighth of an inch. So bring it around again, cross the thread over itself. Get 4 or 5 good wraps on top of itself, like so. Take this tape off. And here's a little tricky part, because you're cutting thread that's on top of thread. Not a big problem. We don't have to cut this too close. We're going to wrap over it anyway. So cut that tag off, and we'll wrap all the way up the guide foot. Again, trying to keep our gap small along the way. You can see there that our thread is smoothly transitioning up on to the guide foot. Now, had we not ground our guide, it would be like a bump. It's hard to get it up on there, and it creates a headache when you're epoxying your rod as well. But here, we did the right thing, made a nice smooth ramp for it to go up. Just like that. Made a mistake again, no problem. Back up a little bit to where our threads are straight again. Get them in line. Again, little gaps are no problem, but what we really don't want to do is we don't want to cross our threads. So everything nice and smooth. Okay, now we're close to the guide foot here. I'm going to go ahead and tighten those threads. Take our quick pull, or if you don't have a quick pull, you can take a piece of thread, pinch it into a loop, like so. Take that loop, put it under the thread, just like we did with the quick pull. Wrap over it 4 or 5 times. Actually 5 or 6 times rather, to be safe, especially on a heavier rod. Again, making sure we don't get too high up on our guide foot. Keep our epoxy nice and clean.